Got a lot of auto jobs coming. Watch what's happening. The companies are coming in by the tens. You got to see what's happening. They all want to come back to Michigan and build cars again. You know why? Because of our tax and tariff policy.
But they did roll them out yesterday, and it's really hard to overstate what a momentous moment this is for the U.S. automaking sector and the global automakers. Probably the biggest disruption since COVID and perhaps since the North American Free Trade Deal was signed in the early 90s.
Hoping to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. CBS's Anna Corin just visited Japan's equivalent of Detroit to see how these tariffs will impact Japan and Americans buying cars.
It wasn't a stock market crash or a natural disaster that silenced Detroit in early 2025. It was politics. A sweeping 25% tariff, meant to shield American industry, instead triggered a chain reaction that cost more than 38,000 workers their jobs within months. Assembly lines at once roared across Michigan and the Midwest went silent. Entire plants locked down, and the region long hailed as a beating heart of America's industry began to resemble an industrial graveyard. The fallout wasn't confined to one brand. From Toyota and Honda to Mazda and Subaru, 7 of Asia's largest automakers suddenly found themselves cornered, their balance sheets bleeding billions. Once considered stable anchors of the industry, they now faced a brutal question. How long could they endure the American market under these conditions, and at what cost to the workers, communities, and suppliers who relied on them the tariffs were supposed to protect? Instead, they forced companies into defensive mode, cutting costs, restructuring, and even weighing whether to retreat from the United States entirely. Was this truly the price of protection, or the beginning of a slow collapse of one of America's most iconic industries? Detroit's silence was a first warning sign. Toyota's struggle became undeniable proof. For decades, the world's largest automaker carried an image of invincibility. It was a company that could weather storms and outlast rivals. But the tariffs exposed cracks. Forecasts that once promised stability was slashed overnight. Profit expectations fell nearly 16%, erasing billions of yen. By the second quarter, Toyota's operating income had plunged close to 11%, sliding to just over 1.1 trillion yen. Investors felt the shock as well. Toyota's stock price dropped more than 10% since January, a rare stumble for a firm that still managed to sell over 5 million vehicles in just the first half of the year. The contradiction was striking. Sales remained strong, but profits crumbled under the weight of Washington's trade war. If Toyota could be shaken, what chance did anyone else have? Honda's story revealed another dimension of the crisis. By 2025, the U.S. accounted for 41% of Honda's global sales, up sharply from just 26% 3 years earlier. What was once a driver of growth had become the company's greatest liability. In the first quarter alone, Honda's profits collapsed by nearly half, wiping out the equivalent of 125 billion yen, about $1.66 billion for a brand built on affordability and middle-class appeal. The blow was devastating. The tariffs had transformed what was once Honda's most profitable market into a financial sinkhole almost overnight. The company's supply chains made the problem worse. Many of Honda's US-bound vehicles were assembled in Canada and Mexico, regions now caught in the web of tariffs and retaliations reshaping North American trade. What had been a symbol of efficiency became a liability. Honda had no choice but to retreat, cutting ambitions, slashing costs, and tightening its grip just to survive. If Honda's retreat was painful, Nissan's struggles exposed the human cost more directly. Known for producing everyday cars within reach of the average worker, Nissan suddenly found itself pricing those very models out of reach. Vehicles like the Versa, long considered a budget-friendly option around $20,000, was suddenly burdened with thousands in additional costs. Even Nissan's leadership admitted the reality. The head of Nissan America warned bluntly that cars were becoming unaffordable for the middle class. For families already strained by rising living costs, the statement resonated like an alarm bell. In the short term, Nissan absorbed much of the tariff burden to shield consumers and keep its supply chain from Mexico and beyond intact. But that strategy came at a heavy cost. Margins evaporated, losses mounted, and the brand's U.S. market, the very core of its business, began to feel suffocated. What happens when the cars designed for everyday Americans are priced like luxuries? Hyundai's challenge wasn't pricing but logistics. Facing the prospect of steep losses, the company launched a special tariff task force to rethink every shipment, assembly line, and supply route. One of its first moves was drastic, shifting production of 16,000 Tucson SUVs from Mexico to Alabama. The shuffle was costly and disruptive, but it underscored how unstable the environment had become. For Hyundai, the stakes couldn't be higher. Roughly one-third of its global sales came from the United States, but two-thirds of the cars it sold there were imported. That imbalance turned into a vulnerability overnight. The tariffs made clear just how fragile the company's U.S. strategy truly was. Markets responded swiftly. Investors watched as shares in major automakers sank. Analysts issued warnings that the industry's once reliable growth had entered uncharted territory. For decades, the global auto sector had been defined by expansion, innovation, and integration across borders. Suddenly, tariffs had reversed the equation, forcing retrenchment, higher costs, and instability. The story of Detroit in 2025 wasn't simply about economics. It was about the ripple effect of political choices. What began as an attempt to protect American jobs instead triggered layoffs, higher prices, and massive uncertainty across the very communities it was meant to safeguard. The silence of Detroit's factories told one story. The financial losses of Toyota, Honda, Nissan, and Hyundai told another. Together, they painted a picture of an industry caught between politics and survival, unsure how long it could endure under the weight of protection that felt more like punishment. Hyundai's vulnerability was exposed the moment Washington unveiled its tariff policy. Shares of the company dropped more than 3% that very day, a signal of just how fragile its position had become. Instead of being shielded, Hyundai's global operations were paralyzed. Every adjustment made to survive in America sent ripples across its plants, suppliers, and investors around the world. A policy designed to defend American industry was, in practice, tearing apart the very networks that kept it running. While Hyundai scrambled to hold its ground, Kia charted a different course. Rather than fighting the storm head-on, it seized the disruption as an opportunity to slash costs and rethink its distribution model. Retail incentives were pulled back, a move expected to save more than $400 million in the second half of the year. The savings offered an immediate cushion against mounting losses. Even so, the pain was undeniable. In the second quarter alone, Kia's profits fell by nearly 25%, wiping out the equivalent of $570 million. Yet instead of retreating, the brand doubled down on ambition, setting a bold target to raise its U.S. market share from just over 5% to more than 6%. Few believed such a gamble could succeed in such uncertain times. Perhaps the most telling decision came beyond U.S. borders. Kia began redirecting inventory toward Canada, quietly transforming crisis into opportunity. As Washington raised walls, Ottawa offered an opening. Canada's market, less hostile to global supply chains, became a lifeline. For Kia, what looked like a dead end in America began to look like a new beginning just across the border. If Toyota and Honda drew headlines and Kia carved out a lifeline, Subaru and Mazda absorbed the shock in near silence. These smaller Japanese brands lacked the global cushion of their rivals, making their dependence on the U.S. market far riskier. Unlike Toyota, which could rely on worldwide scale, or Hyundai, with its diversified production hubs, Subaru and Mazda leaned heavily on American buyers. When tariffs hit, that dependence became a chokehold. For Subaru, the numbers told a story. Nearly 70% of its global sales came from the United States, leaving no fallback option. Tariffs added more than $800 to the average price of its vehicles, pushing models like the Outback, once a staple of American driveways, beyond the reach of families who had long seen it as practical and affordable. Even the entry-level trims, Subaru's gateway to first-time buyers, began vanishing from showrooms as the company slashed offerings to protect margins that were shrinking by the day. For a brand built on loyalty and steady growth, this sudden exclusion from its core demographic marked an existential threat. Mazda's challenge was different but equally destructive. Its reliance on Mexico as a production base backfired when tariffs throttled cross-border flows. Shipments into the U.S. collapsed by more than half in just 4 months, leaving dealers short on inventory and customers staring at higher price tags. The once accessible Mazda 3, marketed as stylish yet affordable, so its price climbed nearly 20% compared to 2022 levels. A car once aimed at young professionals and budget-conscious families now edged toward a tier that excluded precisely those customers. For both Subaru and Mazda, the danger wasn't just financial, it was structural. Subaru's entire identity rested on dependability and its strong bond with middle-income, outdoors-oriented households. Mazda, in contrast, staked its brand on sleek design and the promise of premium quality at a fair price. Both identities were now in jeopardy, reshaped by forces beyond their control. In a market where loyalty is hard-won but easily lost, tariffs place that loyalty under extreme strain. If Subaru's buyers defected to cheaper competitors, or if Mazda's customers concluded the stretch for affordable premium was no longer worth it, the consequences would extend beyond quarterly losses. Brand equity itself was at risk. And once trust is broken, can these companies ever reclaim their footing in the U.S. market? Or will they be relegated in these players in an arena they once considered indispensable? The collapse of 7 major automakers will be alarming enough on its own. But the larger question is what happens next? If even these global giants stumble under protectionist pressure, what does that mean for other American-linked industries? Technology, energy, agriculture? The very policies designed to defend them now appear to be double-edged swords, cutting into U.S. competitiveness while fueling growth elsewhere. Supply chains and investment capital are already in motion, searching for safer harbors. Canada, in particular, is quietly rising as a new hub on the North American industrial map. It is absorbing production, attracting jobs, and offering stability at a time when Washington projects uncertainty. Every job and every dollar shifting north reinforces perception that the United States may no longer be the most reliable place to build the future, and so the debate grows larger than cars. If the American auto industry, once a symbol of strength and innovation, can be brought to its knees by its own government's policies, who will still believe in the promise of U.S. global leadership?